Do you think Rome marched without fear? There were early mornings when the Tiber ran so red that it looked like a river of liquid iron, and the Senate trembled, certain that the eagles would not fly again. In a moment, I will drag you to valleys, drowned in mist, where legionnaires screamed for help that never came, while the gods, if they existed, looked away. Take a deep breath. The empire that built colossal amphitheaters almost crumbled like dust between its fingers. Rome sold the world the armor of invincibility, but underneath there was flesh, fear, and bones. Each victory hid the chance of a disaster that corroded the heart of the empire. Today we will travel through 7 centuries of history in search of the days when the trumpets of glory fell silent and the banners crumbled in the mud. Grab your shield of curiosity and come with me through trenches where Roman pride has truly bled. Imagine marching along a trail surrounded by fog-covered hills, with the muffled sound of armor and the damp smell of weeds filling the air. It was against this backdrop that the Romans, led by Gaius Flaminius, fell straight into a trap set by Hannibal in 217 BC at Lake Trasimene. The Carthaginian general used the landscape as a weapon. He hid thousands of soldiers in the hills and waited for the perfect moment. As the Romans crossed the narrow path between the lake and the hills, silence erupted into shouts. A shower of spears and a shockwave that no one saw coming. The Roman army did not even have room to form a battle line. The soldiers were crushed between the bank and the enemy advance. Many tried to flee into the water and drowned, carrying heavy armor. The mist served as a cloak for a massacre. About 15,000 Romans were killed that day, and when the sun finally broke through the clouds, what was left was an eerie silence and floating bodies. If this type of story has hooked you, it's because you value what few have the courage to tell, the raw truth of the story. Here we don't romanticize the empire. We show what really happened, where blood replaced glory. So, if you want to continue exploring the forgotten backstage of Rome, leave your like now as a way to keep that memory alive. And subscribe to the channel, because the next video may reveal a truth that books have hidden for centuries. Who knows this dark side? He never looks at Rome the same way again. Are you ready to go beyond the official story? Then prove it with one click. Hannibal once again demonstrated that the mind can be more lethal than the sword. In 216 BC, on the plain of Cannae, he faced a Roman army that outnumbered him, about 80,000 men against his 50,000. But Hannibal drew death with surgical precision. He placed his weaker troops in the center and the veterans in the wings. The Romans rushed hard down the middle, thinking they were winning, and were sucked into a crescent-shaped trap. When they were surrounded on all sides, it was too late. The Carthaginians closed the siege. What followed was not a battle, it was carnage. It is estimated that more than 50,000 Romans died in a single day. Soldiers crushed between spears, swords, and panic itself. The field turned into a furnace of blood. Rome, for the first time, tasted the taste of collective death on an imperial scale. The city went into mourning, no funeral, no speech, only the sound of mothers crying and the fear that this time the empire would not rise. Marcus Licinius Crassus was one of the richest men in Rome, but his thirst for glory led him straight to the Mesopotamian desert, where he would face an enemy he didn't understand, the Parthians. In 53 BC at Cannae, Roman pride was swallowed up by dust and arrows. Crassus believed that his numerical superiority would be enough, but the Parthians had something devastating: archers on horseback who fired endless arrows, retreating in circles, the famous maneuver of the Parthian shot. The Romans, slow and poorly positioned in the sandy terrain, were torn apart without ever reaching the enemy. There were hours of terror under a merciless sky. When they tried to negotiate, Crassus was deceived, captured, and executed. Reports say that his body was decapitated and his head used as a prop in a Persian play as a mockery of the Roman power. For Rome, that defeat was more than a military loss, it was a cultural humiliation. The Roman elite, accustomed to domination, had to face the shame of seeing one of their greatest die as a fool. She was a queen, but Rome treated her as property. Boudicca, of the Icene tribe, had her kingdom usurped, was publicly humiliated, and saw her daughters raped by Roman soldiers. What came next was a revenge that Rome never imagined facing on British soil. In 60 AD, she led a revolt so fierce that entire cities were wiped off the map. Camulodunum, Colchester, the Roman capital of Britain, was the first to fall. Temples burned, soldiers beheaded, civilians massacred. Then came Londinium, London, where the Romans fled before the city was turned to ashes. Accounts speak of blood-red rivers and human offerings in barbarian temples. It is estimated that more than 70,000 Romans and allies died. For an instant, Rome lost control of the island. It took a brutal maneuver by General Suetonius Paulinus to contain Boudicca's fury. Even defeated, she became a symbol of resistance against the empire. The lesson was clear. Rome could conquer, but he could not always keep what he took by force. In the year 9 AD, Rome knew what it was like to trust and be betrayed with blood. Arminius, a Germanic trained by the Romans themselves, knew the methods of the legions better than anyone else, and he used that knowledge against them, pledging loyalty. He persuaded the Roman governor Quintilius Varus to march with 3 legions into the forest, a fatal mistake. In the bleak region of Teutoburg, the storm and muddy terrain engulfed the Roman military organization. For 3 days, the army was torn apart by constant ambushes, on terrain where forming cohorts was impossible. The banners were captured, the bodies left in plain sight as trophies. Many legionaries were crucified in trees. The survivors, enslaved. Varro himself committed suicide. When the news reached Rome, Emperor Augustus was in shock. For days he repeated, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions." The 9th, 17th, and 18th legions simply disappeared from history. Rome never rebuilt them. It was as if he wanted to forget, but he couldn't. It was the year 378 AD, and Rome was no longer the invincible force it once was. The Goths, barbarian peoples who sought refuge from the advancing Huns, had been mistreated by the Roman officials themselves. Tension erupted into revolt. Emperor Valens, impatient and underestimating the enemy, decided to engage them without waiting for reinforcements from the west. The Vieux Adrianople camp would become the scene of a disaster. The Roman legions marched under a scorching sun, exhausted and poorly coordinated. As they approached, the Goths emerged from the hills with unexpected force. The enemy cavalry outflanked the Romans and brutally cornered them. Emperor Valens himself disappeared in the chaos. Some say he burned to death inside a house where he was trying to hide. More than half of the Roman army was destroyed. Adrianople wasn't just a military defeat. It was an ominous warning that Rome no longer dictated the rules of the game. From then on, the borders of the empire began to crumble. For the first time, the barbarians understood that Rome bled like any other nation. Valerian believed that he could still expand the glory of Rome to the east. But in 260 AD, facing the Sassanid Persians led by Shapur I, he plunged Rome into unprecedented shame. At Edessa, the Roman army was decimated by a combination of plague, tactical error, and ambush. Surrounded, Valerian tried to negotiate his surrender. He was captured, but what followed surpassed any humiliation. The Roman emperor, the one who represented Rome's own power, was used as a human ladder by Shapur, literally. He knelt for the Sassanid king to ride his horse. According to chroniclers, after death, his body was stuffed with straw and displayed as a trophy in Persian temples. No Roman emperor had ever been captured alive until then. That was a political earthquake. Rome lost its breath and face. His enemies realized that the crown could fall, that the man who wore the purple, it could also be humiliated, emptied, forgotten. Rome was made of stone, but also of fear. Fear that every battle lost was the beginning of the end. And as much as his triumphal arches told stories of glory, it was the defeats that shaped his soul. Each massacre, from Trasimene to Edessa, left scars not only on the fields, but in the corridors of the Senate, in the prayers of generals, and on the pages of history. The truth is that Rome did not last for centuries because it was invincible, but because it learned to survive even when it was on its knees. His true power was not to give up when everything seemed to fall apart. But these battles showed that eternity was an illusion, that even the greatest of empires can bleed, tremble, and fall. And perhaps when we look at these stories, we realize that the fall does not come from the outside, but from the arrogance that prevents us from seeing that the wall also wears away from within. You've seen the other side of Rome. Not that of the glories celebrated in the marble columns, but that of the shadows that the empire tried to bury. Each brutal battle was a reminder that no power is eternal. No matter how disciplined, no matter how grandiose, no matter how feared it may be, the Roman Empire survived each of these tragedies, but came out of them scarred, wounded, and increasingly aware of its own vulnerability. And perhaps this is the great lesson for us today. Empires do not fall all at once. They rot from within until a single defeat brings them down completely. If this video made you see Rome with different eyes, leave your like now as a way to keep alive the memory of stories that don't fit in school books. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Here, the truth of antiquity always comes to the surface, even if covered in blood, stone, and silence. And tell me in the comments, which of these battles shocked you the most? Let's continue this conversation in the field where history and truth meet. If this part of the story impacted you, if for a moment you felt there in the middle of the fog, listening to the screams of the legionnaires and realizing how even an empire can crumble in silence, so you've already received something valuable here today, real knowledge, not packaged in myths, but in truth. And when we receive something that transforms, the fairest thing is to give back. Leave your like as a form of gratitude and subscribe to the channel to continue receiving content that changes the way you see the past, and maybe even the present. Because understanding these stories is not just learning, it is to be transformed by them. And you've just taken that first step.